Hi, everybody. I'm Debby Montgomery Johnson, the founder of the nonprofit, The Woman Behind the Smile, and your host of Stand Up and Speak Up, a show that is about each and every one of us. Many of us have something we're hiding, something we're ashamed of, something that through no fault of our own or through our own making we keep hidden, and that in turn keeps us hidden from each other and the world. Good people go through terrible situations. Wise people know when and how to let it go. Everything that happens to us helps us grow, and while it may be hard to see it right away, the most important thing to do is to change your perception about your circumstances. Regardless of what your personal experiences or traumas have been, this showcase series is designed to ignite the light in you, as well as providing safe harbor, education, personal growth, and resources so that no matter where you are in your journey, you'll have the courage to move on when you're ready. Stand Up and Speak Up features ordinary people who've been through extraordinary situations and struggles and found the courage to step out from behind their smiles and speak up about their experiences and the lessons gleaned from those experiences. Everybody heals at a different pace, and we recognize that. So come on in, have a listen, and enjoy the ride at your own speed. Hello, everybody. Hello from sunny South Florida. And I got to tell my friends in Canada, it's wonderful down here today. And I did hear today that it's a little bit on the warm side up there, so please come on down, enjoy a swimming pool and the ocean, and enjoy the heat because it's part of our life. So today is a really interesting day. It's an interesting show. I've got a guest on today that I think that, I always say that so many of us are sisters by other misters. My guest today is Elizabeth Meyers, and Elizabeth is coming to us from Texas, but today's show is going to be a little bit different. Today is about two strong women, and I'm going to say that humbly because we are, two strong women that were taught to, as I call, suck it up, buttercup, man up, woman up, whatever you want to call it, and keep those things inside of us that have had a real profound effect on us, but have chosen to speak up about what has happened in a way that brings back memories. So today's going to be a very vulnerable, open conversation by two moms who have had a loss but are taking that loss and using it for good, using the purpose for good. And so I would like to welcome my guest, Miss Elizabeth Meyers from Northeast Texas. Hey, Elizabeth, are you there?
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me on today.
It is my pleasure, and I'm so excited. And first off, I want to thank you for your service in the Air Force. Should have the Air Force music playing in the background. You're an Air Force Academy graduate in 1994, and just kind of, I always like to go back a little bit in time, but for us, we've got a lot to talk about, but I do want to ask you, what got you into the Air Force? How did you get into the Academy? Because that's a pretty tough place to get into, especially for women, and back then. And what did you do in the Air Force Academy, and what did you do a little bit afterwards? So there's a lot in that one question.
Yeah, I think that's more than one question, but yeah, definitely. So definitely growing up as a child, my dad had a big influence on me. He had been enlisted in the Air Force during the Vietnam War era, and he was always telling us stories and stuff. I don't remember that time personally. I was very young, but he did get a remote assignment to the Philippines, and my mom and I went with him and lived all kinds of adventures. So I've heard all the stories. I don't remember any of the stories. But that definitely had an influence, in the way he told the stories. The Air Force sounded like a really fun place.
Yeah.
When I got to the Academy, I'm like, Dad, I think you left out some parts. But and then interestingly, I had this one experience that it doesn't seem that profound if I just tell you the story, but for whatever reason, it had a big influence on me. And we were on a family vacation. We were making a road trip, and the van in front of us on the highway, I'm not sure what happened. There wasn't a wreck, but somehow it swerved off the road and flipped over in the median in the middle of the highway. And so we were right behind him. So my dad pulled over, to see if we could help or offer any assistance. And somebody coming from the other direction had already pulled up, had seen it happen, and that gentleman got there just a second or two before my dad. And he pointed at my dad and he said, "You go call 911." This was back in the day before cell phones were invented yet,
Mm-hmm.
So our family hopped back in the car. We went, found a payphone a few exits down, called 911, came back to the scene to see if there was anything else we could do to help. And this guy just had all the chaos under control. He was having people help, he was doing stuff, he was taking care of the situation, and we realized, oh, we'll just be in the way if we're here. So we went ahead and got on. But, processing that with our family afterwards, my dad said, you can tell that guy has had military training, the way that he stayed calm under pressure. He didn't say, somebody call 911. He pointed at somebody and said, you call 911, and he was directive. And for some reason, that just had a big impact on me, and I'm like, I want to be like that. Now, the funny thing is, all these years later, I'm like, if you want to be cool and collected in a crisis, you don't need to go to military training. You need to have 8 children and then homeschool them.
And you don't ask for patience because then chaos hits.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's how I wound up at the Academy. I knew I wanted to go there from like early on in high school, and every year they would have the little college night, and I'd go up to the liaison officer for the Academy, and he's like, yeah, whatever, kid, and he kept pushing me away. And finally, my junior year, he's like, okay, you're still coming back. You're serious, and so he really helped me through the whole process. And for me, academically, I was pretty strong. For me, the hard part was doing a pull-up. Yeah. So, I went to a gym and I worked out and I did all these things. So passing that physical fitness test was the big hurdle for me. And then you need a congressman's appointment, so I clearly remember that interview. And I had also been applying for the Naval Academy, but when I went and visited there for a week, it was, I withdrew my application because I realized the Air Force had done a better job of integrating women at that time.
My oldest son went to the Naval Academy, and I totally see that.
Yeah. So I was just not really impressed with how I was treated while I was there, and I thought, the Air Force Academy is so much better. After having gone through that experience, I realized the Air Force Academy at least knew, okay, it's wrong to be sexist and persecute women, so we're going to hide it. Whereas the Naval Academy was like, yeah, we're sexist and we're proud of it, and we've got the T-shirts and all that kind of stuff. That was my impression.
And that was back in 99. You were around there, 1994.
Yeah, in 90. Yeah. So I related a story during the interview of what I experienced at the Naval Academy, which was the big, finale of the week was we were going to have this briefing on submarines, and it was a big, exciting thing. But because women weren't allowed on submarines, women weren't allowed in the briefing. So they took the handful of us women down the hall to this other little classroom to have a briefing on opportunities for women in the Navy. And the lady there, I don't remember a lot of what she said, but I remember the exact moment that I'm like, this is not for me. She said, you can do a lot of neat jobs in the Navy. You can be a nurse or you can be a secretary for some really important men. And that's when I went, check, please. I will take my intelligence and leadership skills elsewhere where they will be better appreciated. So I told that story during the interview with the congressman, and the lady there were 3 or 4 people there, but the lady who was there was like really fired up about that story. So I think, she definitely voted for me.
Well, I'm looking at the timeline. You were getting in as I was getting out.
Oh,
and
really?
yeah, I got out in December of 1990. And I remember my exit interview with the general officer at the Pentagon, and I at that point I said, sir, I'm going home to take care of my family. And I said, I don't want to be like the women, the colonels that I see. And, they were nice women, but I just didn't want to be like them. I felt like I needed to be there for my kids. But I was interviewed a couple weeks ago, and someone asked me, what was it like being in the service? Was there any sexism? Was there any, abuse? For me, no. I saw it. Some other women, I hate to say, brought it on themselves, but some of them did. But I just was me, and I get the impression that you were just you, and you wanted to do your best. And so when you went in, this is for girls, thinking about going to the academies. Did you have a math background? What was your educational?
Yeah, so math I never thought I was strong in. It's only actually been recently that I kind of learned to appreciate my math skills. I always thought I was bad at math, but looking back on my educational experience, there were 3 different times where I demoted myself. Like I tested for a higher level of math and I didn't. So going into the academy, they gave us all these academic tests, and I tested into Calculus 2 because I'd taken Calculus 1 in high school. But I'm like, no, that's too intimidating. Put me back in Calculus 1. So I repeated Calculus 1 just because I was afraid of it. But I did always enjoy science. Science was always my favorite subject. And, of course, you know, I'm a writer. I'm an author now, so I always loved reading and writing. So
what did you get your degree in?
So my degree is in human factors engineering, which is, it sounds fancy, but it's actually a branch of behavioral science.
Okay.
And it's basically how do you design, in this case, cockpits to work with the way the human mind works. And how do you know, a lot of things that are accidents that are labeled user error, or, you know, it's the fault of the human operator. A lot of times if the system had been designed better, they wouldn't have made that mistake in the first place.
I got to tell you, having two sons that are pilots, that sounds really cool.
Mhm. Yeah. It was a really fun degree, and I had hoped to use that degree when I got out in the Air Force. That didn't wind up happening. And I would just like to backtrack a little and say my experience in the atmosphere at the Air Force Academy versus active duty are two totally different universes that are not related to each other. So while there was a lot of sexism and issues at the Academy, I never had a problem active duty. Okay. That was a totally different situation. I felt respected and everything. And plus, you know, in an active duty situation, you're not living with the guys you're working with. Right. I basically lived in a men's frat house. Or, you know, we were in close quarters. We were confined. We weren't allowed to leave for 4 years. Right. So that just, you know, creates a host of problems. When people are working active duty and they have their own families and you go home to your own family in the evening, then there's not as much issue at work, I think.
So your husband was at the Academy at the same time. You guys knew each other? Were you,
so he knew of me. Women kind of stuck out like a sore thumb back then.
Yeah.
At that time, we were only 10% female. Now, I think it's closer to 25% female at the Academy. Okay. And I also should say it's a totally different world today. We went back for our 25th reunion, and my jaw hit the table. I'm just like, oh, my goodness, it is so different. So a lot of the issues that I had and kind of the trauma and the PTSD that my class has is no longer a thing. It's much more conducive to humanity now. Yeah. So, I would say to young ladies who are interested in that now, I would say go for it. It's a much different world than when I went through it. There's been a lot of changes, a lot of work done, a lot of problems that were dealt with. And so it's a really great place now.
Well, it was an experiment. I mean, when I got into on active duty, it was 1983, and I think I mentioned to you in one of our emails that one of my friends was the first graduating class of the Academy for women, and it was a tough place. It was really tough because nobody really knew what to do with you guys, and yeah. And you know, I remember too, my son at the Naval Academy, there was a feeling that they didn't really want the girls there. And they still didn't. And so, you know, they had to deal with that. And part of me as a warrior woman was like, well, I can do that. I can be, you know, involved in that stuff. And then part of me is like, well, you know, if we can't go into combat, then we are taking some of those positions away. So I see both sides. In any event, I thank you for your service and thank you for getting through the Academy. And I see the picture of your husband, and he was a hot dog pilot, and my heart goes out to my pilot friends and buddies. He is retired recently, is that correct?
Yes, he is in the process. Technically, he is on terminal leave right now, but next month we will be officially retired after, if you include his Academy time, it's like 31 years of service.
And he is not an empty nester.
Oh, no, far from it.
So
our nest is very full.
Let's get that one right out of the bat. You guys have how many kids at home now?
We have 8 children. We have 4 boys and 4 girls, and our oldest 2 have launched off into adulthood. Our oldest son is in the Marines, and he's married. And our 3rd oldest is getting ready to launch next week. He's just gotten a job, and so he's moving out and moving on. He's got his bachelor's degree. And so that will be 5 still at home. And the next oldest one, our fourth child, is doing college online at home right now through Liberty University. So there's the four youngest kids. The second half of the children I'm still homeschooling them. So.
But you guys didn't have a break. You were telling me that the kids are 2 years apart, so it wasn't like the first half were, at this age, and then you had a break.
No, we had them, every 2 years, and I did the math at one point, and there were 14 years straight where I was either pregnant or nursing or both. And so when my youngest turned 5, he's 9 right now, but when he turned 5, I kind of picked my head up and go, wow, where did the last 20 years of my life go? Because I was busy.
Buying. You guys should have been sponsored by Huggies.
Probably so.
I remember living in Germany, and my 2 boys were, under 3, and I would go to the commissary, and I would get 2 sizes of Huggies, and the looks I got from people were like, what are you? So I can just imagine what you went through. And you guys, did you move around a lot?
Oh, yeah. So it was kind of the joke that every time we moved, we added another child to the process. So the moves got more and more complicated as time went on. But, most of our assignments were around 2 years. So we just did our 15th move in 25 years of marriage. So it's been a lot of moving.
So in the house you're in now, you're going to be able to paint the walls something other than white.
Yeah, I'm actually not. That wasn't what I was looking most forward to. What I was really looking forward to was donating all the curtains and curtain rods that I don't need, because you always save them for the next house to go. And also, I've always wanted to have like chickens and a garden and stuff like that. I don't know what I'm doing, but we do. We have chickens and sheep, and so we're kind of out in the country in Northeast Texas, and so I'm just having fun learning how to do all that. We've lived on base a lot. You're not allowed to have chickens on base, obviously, and they're difficult to move with and whatever. So I've really been looking forward to doing this, and so we're living the dream.
Good luck with the chickens. My oldest had chickens in Yuma, and when I went out to visit, all I could do was had to bring the hose out and spray everything down. He was not on a farm. He was in a neighborhood. And I said, these are really expensive eggs.
Yeah, ours aren't laying eggs yet. They're just now starting to look like adult chickens, but they got another month or so before they'll make breakfast for us. But we're looking forward to that.
Well, train the little ones to go out and clean them and pick up the eggs. It was so funny. My 3-year-old grandson used to go out and get the eggs for me, and they were because they're pretty. They're pretty eggs. But then one day he showed up with a chicken that was getting pecked by one of his buddies. He was running around the inside of the house with this chicken, which is just as big as he was. Funniest thing ever. But I'm like, you guys can hang on to the chickens. Good luck. So it sounds like you've had an extraordinary life, fun life, exciting life, full of kids, full of noise. But the reason for our talk today is, in addition to all of that, there are things that have happened, and you're the one to say that I've got these beautiful children, but there's still this hole in my heart. So we're just going to put it out there. Elizabeth, tell me what happened, and let's just get into that story, because it's very personal to me too.
Yeah, definitely. So, a lot of people look at me with 8 kids and they go, oh, that would drive you crazy. But what I often share with people is, it's not the 8 children I have that have pushed me over the edge. It's the one that I lost. And it was our 6th pregnancy. We were on vacation, actually, away from home, visiting relatives. And I was 14 weeks pregnant, and my son's body was just kind of suddenly born. I didn't realize that he must have passed away, a couple of days before. I didn't know that. And it wasn't until after he was born, then, my body started bleeding and, reacting and kind of freaking out. So, anytime you lose a child, it's traumatic, but also just the way it all happened and unfolded was it produced a lot of trauma in my life, and a lot of almost kind of PTSD of, for months, I just kept reliving those moments. And, I had trouble engaging with the present because I was dwelling in the past. And I just really struggled I got stuck in a place of grief, because our culture doesn't really know how to grieve the passing of a child who wasn't born yet. And the statistics say like 25% of women, I think, have had a miscarriage, but we we never talk about it.
Yeah.
And so I was just totally unprepared for this. I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know how to, if a older child had passed away, there would be a funeral, a memorial service. People would, honor that life. But in this case, even the hospital refused to refer to him as a baby. They called him the product of conception. Because he was less than 20 weeks, in their mind, he was not fully human. And that was just devastating to me. They wouldn't give me his body back so that I could, bury him. They cremated him and spread his ashes themselves, and I wasn't allowed to go to that ceremony because they didn't want to mess with differing religious beliefs of parents. So they just said, whatever doctor or nurse represented your child, they'll go on their behalf. Well, I was out of town.
Where was this?
It was in Dallas. We lived in Alabama at the time. We were stationed at Maxwell Air Force Base, and we had come back to visit family in Dallas. And, he was born at my parents' house, and then we went to the ER because, I started bleeding and situations, and we took his body with us, and they took it and wouldn't give it back.
I'm just sitting here, because you and I talked a little bit. I mean, I lost a baby at 18 weeks, but it was different. I didn't deliver. I went in for an appointment. And, it's interesting. I was talking to someone about journaling, and I think you're a big proponent of journaling. I was looking at my journal this morning on March of 1990, talking about my doctor's appointment. I had a girlfriend flying. I flew in. I went into the hospital and went in for my OB appointment to get, the ultrasound and everything, and we were going to have a great weekend. My friend had flown in for the weekend, and there was no heartbeat, and just a description of that, and that led to, I was at, before, like you said, the 20 weeks is the cutoff point. That's the point where you either go into labor to deliver, or in my case, they called it a D&E, not a D&C. But then they also didn't call it a baby, they called it, we call it miscarriage. I was reading what I wrote, and they call it a fetal demise. I'm thinking, well, that's kind of technical. But again, I never saw the baby either, but I did get a pathology report, and that's how I found out that ours was a little boy. So, but nobody talks about it. And like you were saying, people got silent. And then afterwards, it's like, well, you can have more kids. You're young. I was like, well, that's not what we want to hear. So you actually delivered the baby spontaneously?
Yeah. He was just, I had been cramping a little bit the night before. And so I woke up to nurse my my youngest child at the time. And I told my husband then what was going on, and that something didn't quite feel right. And so he put his hand on my belly and prayed for me, prayed for the child. And right as he said, Lord, we surrender this child to you, my water broke. And I ran to the bathroom, and his body was born. I could just hold him in the palm of my hand. And the first thing I said was, it's a boy, because we hadn't known the gender yet. He wasn't mature enough yet to tell on an ultrasound, but obviously when you're holding him in your hand, you can tell.
Right.
And, it was obvious at that point that he had already passed. His spirit was already with Jesus. But I mean, even if he had have been alive at that point, he was way too young to survive on his own. So it was just really traumatizing and really devastating. And, to hold your baby in your hand like that, and then to have people tell you he's not really human, or it doesn't really matter. I tried to find out what happened, what went wrong. I had all these questions, and the doctors and nurses, the medical people I talked to, they're like, we don't really care. If you have 3 miscarriages in a row, then we'll look into it. Yeah. And I was kind of like, that's like if my child gets kidnapped or murdered, and I go to the police and I'm like, help me find my child, help me figure out what happened, and they go, well, we don't do it till it happens 3 times in a row.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was kind of felt like a slap in the face. And I don't know. You would think that people who worked in a medical field, I'm not the only woman that's ever lost a baby. You think they would have some training or some awareness of how to handle that. But even people who do these kinds of things for a profession, were speechless. They would just kind of awkwardly leave, or, people would say, oh, well, it's, a good thing you weren't further along in the pregnancy. And I'm like, that's like if somebody's 3-year-old dies and you say, well, good thing they weren't 5, because you would have been more attached to them at 5.
Yeah, that's
and I'm
so
like,
insensitive.
no, that's not the case. It doesn't. I even had a friend of mine, well, an acquaintance who had a full-term stillbirth. And so I went to her. I thought, well, maybe she'll understand. And even she said, oh, no, stillbirth and a miscarriage are nothing alike, and kind of dismissed me. And I was like, wow. I mean, it was just really hard to find somebody who could understand what I was going through.
So did you end up in the hospital then for a period of time, or you just went home?
So we just went to the ER, and they kind of checked me out, and they said, oh, you're fine. But I think they weren't aware, and I was too discombobulated to be aware of how much I was bleeding at that time. It was really kind of excessive, but we didn't realize it. So it kind of tapered off that week, and then we went back home, and then that happened on a Monday. It was actually Memorial Day weekend. It was Monday, so I just passed the 14th anniversary of his passing. Yeah. We went back home the next week, and it was the following Sunday. I kind of just, I don't want to be too graphic, but I woke up in a pool of my own blood, basically. I just started hemorrhaging and uncontrollably and couldn't stop it. So at that point, this was a week later, I went to the ER, and they wound up having to do like a DNC. I think it was just a C, actually, because the dilation had already occurred. But basically, part of the placenta got stuck back, and so it was not allowing the uterus to contract and turn things off. Yeah. So they had to go in and remove that. And then after that, I was able to do the rest of the healing on my own. But I lost a lot of blood, but not quite. I didn't quite cross the threshold for needing a transfusion. I was very close. So I was anemic for months afterwards, which didn't help the whole grieving process.
Exactly. And then also not being able to really slow down, because you had 5 other children that needed mommy and didn't know what was going on. Did any of the kids, they were all pretty young, did any of them understand what had happened, or did you just go on as normal?
That morning before my husband took me to the hospital, because we were supposed to go to a family picnic kind of a thing for Memorial Day. And so instead of that, my husband and I went to the ER, and my parents took the kids to the party. But so we told them what had happened. They had known that I was pregnant. As a family, we had prayed for the baby. And so we told them. And at that point, it was only my oldest son. He reacted. He cried a little. I think he kind of understood. Obviously, the youngest one didn't know what was going on. But it wasn't until later that my second oldest, my daughter, she was 7 at the time that it happened, but she kind of went through a grieving process later of just trying to process it in her own way. And that was hard for me, because I was struggling with how to process it myself. And, I didn't know how to help her. Fortunately, she felt comfortable to confide in a Sunday school teacher that she knew at church. And that lady was very compassionate to her and, helped her deal with the stuff. When she would have feelings come up during Sunday school class, this teacher was just very loving towards her. And I was so grateful for that. I didn't even really know her. It was a big church, and she wasn't like a friend of mine or anything, but she was there for my daughter when I couldn't figure out how to be there for my daughter. So I really appreciate that.
Did you ever get to the point where you were blaming yourself for what was going on?
Oh, yeah. So because they never found out a medical reason of what happened to him or why he passed away, and part of that is because they wouldn't do my pleadings of asking, trying to find out. So I found a million ways to blame myself of, how it was. And then even, inadvertently, people will say things that, even just the word miscarriage, I'm like, I hate that word. It sounds like I dropped my baby. Or you say I lost my child even. I'm like, I didn't lose my child. I know where he is. He's in heaven. My baby died, but we don't use that language with it. And so, that's challenging.
And how did you get over that? Because I had heard you talk one time that, forgiveness is a tough thing, especially when it comes to you and your own actions. How did you forgive yourself first? It's a tough thing because, that blame game, that self-blame, and there's absolutely nothing you can do. And I knew that too, but like you're thinking, did I not eat right? Did I not exercise right? Was I too busy? What did I do? Because we didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't do those kinds of things. But there are other people that you had to learn to forgive.
Yeah, and that was a big part of it. And for me, my biggest hang up, like I said, was kind of with the things that the medical personnel had said and done. And I got to the place where I was kind of like just following Jesus' example. They were in the act of crucifying him. And he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And, I can kind of look at that and go, oh, they sure did know what they were doing. They had a fake trial, unjustly accused him. They were killing an innocent man. They were nailing him to the cross. But he says they didn't know what they were doing. And I kind of came to that same place of, all these hurtful comments that were made to me. The people didn't realize what they were doing. People don't know what to say. And a lot of it was just clumsiness, not trying to be hurtful to me. Mm-hmm. And so that helped me forgive others. Forgiving myself is a much harder thing. And ultimately, it came to just resting and trusting in God's plan. And I wrestled with questions and doubts for a long time, for years. And it really shook my faith. And that's a lot of that is in my book. But it was just working through this process of, I realized that even if God came down and gave me all the answers I wanted, it still wouldn't heal my hurt. I still would be missing my son. I still would be grieving. And that actually what I don't want all the answers to all my questions. I actually just want God's presence with me. And so I think when I just kind of more surrendered to God has a plan and he's good even when I don't understand it, then that kind of released all the guilt and the blame that I was putting on myself. There was nothing specific that pointed to it was my fault, and there was nothing specific that pointed to anything else. So it's just I'll never know this side of heaven. I don't know what caused it, and blaming myself is not healthy. I don't even have like a reason to. There are other places where I did make a legitimate mistake, and I blame myself for that. But in this case, it all the blame was just imaginary in my head. Right. So the big part of forgiving others and forgiving myself was really healing and restoring my relationship with God. And this may sound strange, and it's not. I know it's not theologically correct, but I also had to work through this idea of forgiving God. Not that he needs my forgiveness and not that he ever does anything wrong, but I had felt betrayed. And so, I kind of had to work through that situation. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that makes sense and you understand what I'm saying by that. I'm not accusing him of any wrongdoing, but I felt that way at the time.
Well, I think any trial that we go through, that we can't understand, it's part of us to start blaming, to mm-hmm. find fault in somebody, not necessarily ourselves, but in somebody because we can't explain what happened. I was mm-hmm. reading something this morning. It was called a story called My Unrecognized Blessings, and in it goes, you go through trials and difficulties in life so you can learn how to recognize blessings and be grateful for them. And then the author goes on, I realized that I had to experience hardship so that I could appreciate Heavenly Father's blessings. Through my trials, I recognized my blessings and became grateful for them. And then I went to my journal, and after, on the day that I lost my little guy, John Henry, it says, my Poppy, that was my husband, is terribly sad, but we both realize we've got so much to be thankful for, and we've got each other to love and cherish. And that was in the midst of something horrible, yeah. But I think it comes back to the way we process things, the way we process trials, and going back to that, suck it up, Buttercup. It's not that we want to dismiss what happened, because I don't know, it's been a while though. You did dismiss it for a while, didn't you? Did you hide this for a while?
Yeah, so I think initially I tried to kind of go, hey, something's wrong, but I got enough people that didn't get it, or, they would just distance themselves from me. Again, this whole military lifestyle, we were at a off-cycle kind of move thing. My husband was at a course at Maxwell Air Force Base, and, it lasts a year, and we were the December class, and this happened at the end of May. So everybody who knew that I was pregnant moved away the week after it happened. They never even knew that I lost the baby. And then we waited a month over the summer, and then a whole new class of people came in, and so it was this arduous process of introducing myself to new people when I was just gone through this. And what's the question everybody asks you? Oh, how many kids do you have? And I couldn't answer that question, because if I said 5, I felt like I was joining everybody else and denying the existence of my son, that I was denying his life ever existed. But if I said 6, and then people were like, well, you only have 5 here, then I had to say, well, I just lost a baby, and then they'd go, oh, and they just move on. So I did get to the point where I hit it, and I love the title of your thing, of The Woman Behind the Smile, because I just got to the point where I fake it. And in my book I talk about how I grew up as a dancer, and kind of that thing of the show must go on, and you smile no matter how it feels. And then I went from there to the military, where it's, all about military bearing, and you keep a straight face through anything. And so I just kind of fell back on those 2 training models of, I'm dying on the inside, but I'll put on a smile on the outside. Nobody knew how bad I was suffering. And part of it was pride. Part of it was, I feel like Christians should be joyful and peaceful, and I'm depressed and anxious. What's wrong with me? There's a stigma with mental health issues, both in the Christian circles and in military circles. My husband was going up for squadron command, and I didn't want to highlight the fact that I was having mental health issues, because I thought that would hurt his chances of getting the job that he wanted. So there were all these compounding factors of why I put on a smile, and I didn't really start to get free from that till I said, hey, something's wrong. I'm messed up. I'm broken. I need help. And so it wasn't until the real woman that was behind the smile came out and said, hey, I'm here. And that's where my healing started.
How did this affect, and I've talked to other men before, how did this affect your husband?
So very
kind of wish he was on the show, because I would ask him. I think it's a valuable side of the story to hear.
Right. It affected him very differently, and it was difficult for him to comprehend how I was feeling at first. To me, I felt like I had lost a child just as if any of our other children. It was the same degree of grief. It wasn't less because he hadn't been born yet. To my husband, he felt like he was grieving a stranger. He, it's like if he had read an obituary in the newspaper of somebody passing away that he didn't know, he would go, oh, that's really sad. That's tragic, a bummer. But then he would just move on. Initially, I couldn't understand why he wasn't more upset, and he couldn't understand why I couldn't move on. Eventually we worked through all these things, and we came to the understanding that, different things affect people in different ways. And often it's not just what happens to us in life, but it's how we interpret what happened to us in life that kind of makes the difference. But everybody grieves in a different way on a different timeline. I've even talked to other women who have lost children, and it did not impact them as profoundly as it impacted me. So I think we just have to give grace to everybody and let everybody process their emotions the way that they need to. Now, since then, we've learned so much. Some people have gone, when my book comes out, they're like, well, why didn't you tell me that you were hurting so bad? I'm like, I didn't know how. This was all new for me too. I didn't know how to tell you what I needed then. It's taken years of work and prayer and therapy to get to the point where I can articulate all of this. But I went through years going, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just know that I feel bad. So we've been able to work through a lot of stuff. But then as a commander, several times, my husband has had the opportunity to counsel other young dads when their wife had a miscarriage or lost a baby. And we've gotten feedback from those couples that I'm not sure what he said. I wish I have a recording of that. But how much that impacted him. It happened to one of his squadron members while he was deployed. And so, the wife is at home dealing with this loss, and the husband is overseas, which further complicates it. And he said the conversation he had, this young father had with his wife on the phone before he talked to my husband and the one after he talked to my husband were just 180, completely different. And so in speaking to my husband, he was better able to understand what his wife was going through and better able to, help her out as well as he could from the other side of the world. So I feel like good has come out of that my husband's able to speak to other dads in that situation and articulate more what their wife might be feeling. Again, everybody's different. Not everybody's going to experience it the same way I can, but he can just kind of present them with a different perspective of, hey, men, I think they don't really connect as much until the baby's actually there, till the baby's born.
Right.
We connect and bond with the baby because, they're a part of our body. We can't help it. So I think it's just a different experience. And my husband was really understanding and took good care of me, especially early on. I was physically weak for a long time. And, like you mentioned, we had 5 other kids, which was actually a huge blessing because if I didn't have them, I wouldn't have gotten out of bed in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
They're what kept me going. They're the reason I continued to want to live, it's very different how moms and dads handle this. And even from one mom to the next is different. So we just need to give everybody grace.
Well, and I think that we need to be able to talk about it because I, like you, when I had my first miscarriage, it was before I even had a live birth, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh. Well, then everybody and their uncle comes out and says, well, I had one. I was like, why didn't you tell me? And then I tried to be Pollyanna. I think, well, at least I can get pregnant, And then my next one was my oldest son, my live birth. But I found that, especially after I lost John Henry, is like I didn't have anybody to talk to. I couldn't say what had happened. I couldn't explain, like you can't explain what had happened. People feel bad, but how do you move on? And I always thought that all the emphasis was put on the mothers and not on the husbands. And my kid's dad had passed away 11 years ago, but I was thinking about him, and I was like, nobody ever asked Lou how he felt. And so he'd go back to work. He was a major. He was doing his stuff. He went back to work, and it was like things were normal. But then I've remarried, and my husband, CJ, they lost a baby at 7 months. And I was talking to him this morning about our call today, and it's still very emotional for him, but he goes, you know what? That was the point in time where it changed my relationship. And he went off to work. He didn't talk about it. And he's like, you know what? That fundamentally changed his life, that nobody talked about it. It changed their relationship because they didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? We need to be able to stand up and speak up. And that's exactly why we're having the show, is because I think even the men need to learn how to speak about it. I interviewed a man, and we got onto that topic, and he said, Deb, this is the first time anybody's ever asked about how I felt. And it was very important because their marriage split up too. I mean, I honor you and your hubby for sticking together and really creating this great family in spite of that happening, because that could have split you up.
Yeah, definitely. I don't remember the exact statistic, but losing a child is like one of, a leading cause of marriages not surviving because, they handle the grief differently and whatever, and it just splinters things apart. And I think that's no less true if your child dies before he or she was born, we try to sometimes put pregnancy life into this different category, but to me it's the same. It's the same life. It's the same child. It's just inside the womb or outside the womb. It's still all the same to me. And I don't know. We kind of put this artificial barrier up of before the child is born, it's like not really in existence in some way. I love how they measure age in Korea. We were stationed in Korea for a year, but when you're born, you're a year old.
Yeah.
They count the 9 months before, and then everybody changes their age in January, which we kind of do in our family anyway because it's hard to keep track of all the. So like at the end of an even year, all my kids are even ages. At the end of an odd year, they're all odd. So we just kind of switch everybody in January because it's easier.
There you go. I never heard of that. That's fun. But Lou used to say that too. He said, well, you're going into your 51st year, your 52nd year. I'm like, no, I'm not. Here we're trying to stay back a year. It's like, no, you're in your next year, which is really true. You're really true. It's funny. So you've made this your mission. You've become the woman with the smile, not the woman behind the smile. And tell us about your book and, what are you telling people that you're talking to? What is your message about hope and moving forward? How do we do that?
So I went for 5 years with untreated depression, basically, and I didn't realize that's what it was for much of that time. But finally, the pain of staying the same exceeded the pain of making changes in my life. And I told my husband, I'm like, something is wrong and I need help. And he's like, okay, let's get you help. Let's support this. And at the time, I didn't know, am I exhausted because I'm depressed, or am I depressed because I'm so exhausted, or is it all a spiritual thing because I'm angry at God? Like, how do I fix this? How do I fix how I feel? And I didn't know. So military training comes into play. I said, I'm going to attack this on all 4 fronts: spiritually, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I just thought of, what's the next best baby step? So, I went to my doctor. I got on a medication. I started taking better care of myself physically. Those are all in the physical area. As a mom of 8, self-care was non-existent. So I'm a big proponent of self-care. I'm a big proponent of saying, I need help, of integrating the woman with the smile and the woman without the smile.
Mm-hmm.
There's some truth in both, but I think we just need to be okay with that dichotomy of, I'm hurting, but there's also blessing, and I'm very happy, but I also have this deep sadness, this wound that's not healed yet. And kind of being able to express both those things. I struggled for so long with, why do I feel so bad? I have a great family. I have these amazing kids. My husband and I have a great relationship. He's got a good job. So then on top of feeling depressed, I threw a big slab of guilt on there. Mm. So I think it's okay to acknowledge both the smile and the thing that's going on behind the scenes. So I would say get help. Physically, I took those steps. Emotionally, I got counseling, and it took a couple of tries to find a therapist that I clicked with. So I also encourage people, keep trying. Your health, whether it's physical health or mental health or whatever, it's worth it. And sometimes you have to try more than one thing, or more than one doctor, or more than one counselor. I also, re-engaged with God. I started my prayer time and Bible reading in the morning again. I went to my pastor's wife and asked for help in prayer. And that was big for me, because I thought, a Christian's not supposed to be depressed. I can't tell you how many sermons I've heard of, a pill won't fix it. I'm like, well, that's true. It was almost like there's this stigma of, if you go get an antidepressant, then you're not trusting God enough. Mm-hmm. But for me, the medication gave me just enough of a bump where I could do these other things. So, yeah, a pill by itself is not going to fix it. And in my case, prayer alone didn't fix it. I just wanted God to reach down and magically heal me. And he totally can. But in my case, he wanted me to walk through the process of partnering with him in laying hold of my healing and my wholeness and walking through those steps.
We also have to remember that God creates doctors, so we have someone to help us.
Yeah, this is true. And we get that on a physical sense, but sometimes people still have hang-ups on a mental health perspective. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm also big on the integration of these things. Your physical health can affect your mental health and vice versa. And our spirit is all integrated in these. I think in Western Christianity, we tend to disregard the body and the physical things. We think that's separate from our mental health or our spiritual health, and they're not. They're all integrated. Mm-hmm. And so the mind, the thought process is another thing that I'm big on, and our mindset, changing our mindset and the way we think about the things that happen to us, how we interpret them.
I have seen a picture of you running. Do you still run?
I'm not currently right now. I had hip surgery last year in January, and right as I was coming out, right as I was able to start going to the gym again, that's when all the gyms closed because of COVID. Oh, yeah. And so I've had some issues, and running is no longer possible for me right now. But I did really enjoy that season of running. It's an excellent anti-anxiety situation. I just go run off all my anxious energy, and it works better than medication.
For me, it's swimming. It's water aerobics now. A little bit of less gravity and weight on the hip.
Right.
But it's still a way you need to find a pool out there in Northeast Texas.
Well, yeah, I need to find a lower impact thing, because all that impact was messing up my joints. But I have hang-ups about swimming from water survival at the Academy.
Oh, dear.
PTSD from that too. If I get in a pool, I'm afraid I'm going to die. So
okay, we got to work on that too, because there's nothing greater than getting control of looking at what for me, especially after Lou died. I would look up as I was doing laps especially as doing backstroke, there's something on the ceiling that was straight, and I would just keep that. I would be looking at that straight line, and it would keep me straight down the middle of the lap pool. But there's great control in taking care of your body like that, and that is part of your holds. I mean, your hopes, HOPES. It was the S there is practice of self-care and a strong body, which so many, especially during the pandemic now, I think so many people have just kind of let it go. I know I put on a few extra pounds just because it's easy to stay in and eat. And that just, for me, that's depressing, seeing that extra pound is like, I got to get this off. And then, so you don't, but you just tell us about your book a little bit and the name of it, how people can get a hold of it.
Yeah, it's called Undefeated from Trial to Triumph. And it started as a journal in my morning quiet times with God, as I would write down things that, thoughts that I had or things that were meaningful to me. It was actually at the encouragement of my counselor, because I would have times where I was really depressed and I couldn't see a reason to hope at all. And then I would have times where I was okay. And I was like, why was I so upset last week? So she told me, when you're feeling okay, write a letter to your depressed self of what that depressed person needs to remember. And so that's what I started doing, was writing that down. And 3/4 of the way through, I'm like, I think this is a book. And then it grew to be too big of a book, so I chopped it up into thirds, and I made it a nonfiction trilogy. I don't know if that's a thing. So the second book is coming out sometime this year. It's at the editors right now, but it's called Undaunted, Your Battle Plan for Victorious Living. And it goes through all those 5 areas of, spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally. And then I added the 5th one, motivational, or a strong will, the perseverance, the ability to rise again after you fall.
So you see definitely the value of journaling through the pain.
Yeah, I've always been kind of a writer person, but for me, when I write something down, it helps me solidify my thoughts, and then I can go back and reread it later when I forget that thought that I had. I've always said, if I'm the only person that ever reads my book, it was worth it, because it helped me process through everything. And there's sometimes, when I'm having a bad day and I'll go back and read something I wrote and I'm like, wow, I forgot that. I knew that truth at one time, but I've forgotten it in the midst of the pressure I'm feeling today. And so my writing encourages me, even if it hopefully it helps others too.
Well, and also I found when I wrote my book too, was helping me to release the emotions of the painful thing that happened. And so I can hear it in your voice now. I'm sure it's changed over the years, that being able to talk about losing the baby is now very powerful, because it has become your passion to educate and to let everybody know that it's okay to talk about these things. So do you feel that when you're talking now versus when you first came out?
Yeah, definitely. It gives purpose and meaning to his life to me. His life was so brief. But when I can use my experience from that to help others, it's like I can see, a greater plan, a bigger picture. And, if I help somebody else to not feel as bad as I felt when I was going through that, then, it just gives meaning and purpose to that pain. It doesn't erase it or take it away. But I don't believe that God wastes anything. I believe he can redeem anything. And so, I struggled for a lot of years, and it felt pointless and wasteful and useless to me. But now I can go back and see how God was at work in those things and how he's using these things for good now. When you're in the middle of trying to deal with the raw emotions of a tragedy, you don't want to hear someone say, oh, God works all things together for good. But it's true, he does. You just don't want to hear it right away. You need to give that some time. But now, I've gone through this healing. And for me, a big part of it was my counselor did EMDR. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Eye movement reprocessing and desensitization. Okay. It's a mouthful. But that helped me get unstuck from those emotions. Prior to that treatment, I was not able to talk about my son without falling apart and breaking up in tears. And this was years later. And so it's because of the healing that I went through with my counselor that now it's still there. The memories are still there, but I can talk about it without reliving it. So now I'm free now to share about the thing. And I always think it's ironic that, for years, like we said, I tried to hide the fact that I was depressed. It's that woman behind the smile thing again. And now, like, I get on podcasts, I put it out there, talking to people. I'm like, hey, I struggle with depression and anxiety. This is part of my message. It's no longer a shameful thing. This is the thing that I deal with, and I want to help other people who deal with it because I know I'm not alone. And when we take those dark secrets that we try to stuff in the closet, when we drag all that stuff out into the light, it loses its power over us. It's no longer a shameful secret I'm trying to hide. It's now like, hey, this is a thing that I deal with, and here's how I deal with it, and maybe that can help you too.
So did you ever have anybody, what I call, give you the stink eye because you're telling the story?
I don't think that I have, like not since, I felt like people kind of brushed me off initially when I tried to, as I described, but
okay. Because I work with an organization called SCARS, which is the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. And the hardest part for people to, when they come out with their story, they don't want to tell their story. They're afraid of what people are going to think about what happened.
Yeah.
And like initially, I'm sure when you came out with talking about depression, I know growing up, we never talked about mental health. We didn't talk about that kind of stuff. So, did you ever feel that people were judging you as you came out? And if so, how did you get past that? Or did you just say, it doesn't matter because it's my story?
Yeah, I don't recall feeling that, but I was more focused on trying to help other people. And if somebody's going to be judging me about that, then they probably aren't the person I'm trying to reach because they're not sympathetic to that cause. So it doesn't matter, really.
Perfect.
I'm trying to help people who do resonate with my message. And so the people who don't resonate with my message, well, they just go listen to somebody else.
Perfect.
But, as a commander spouse, here in our last recent assignment, I would talk all the time at our spouse functions of, this is a hard life we live. Our guys are gone 6 months at a time. And so I would share openly my own struggle with mental health. I'm like, get help. Here are your resources. The military has great resources for these things. Mm-hmm. Utilize them. And don't worry, I share how I stressed so much about this affecting my husband's career. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what's more important, your career or your husband's career or your mental health? You need to take care of yourself. And especially as young moms, people just need someone to say, hey, self-care is important. It's not selfish. It's necessary. And you need to learn how to make time for that early on.
Well, I so resonate with what you're saying because it's exactly how I feel. And, I try to put myself around people that understand that, and we share the same things. And that's why we're doing Stand Up and Speak Up, because it's something that there's so many of us out there that have a voice but feel like we need to squash it. And we don't, because like you said, there's one person out there that needs to hear what's happened to us. And in your case, as a squadron commander, as a commander's wife, you're in such a position. I mean, I remember my sister-in-law, when my brother was commander, she was in charge of the wives groups and all this, and what she said really had an impact on people. And if what you went through and what I've gone through is meant to have happened because we can be there for one other person, then it was worth happening. It's worth it. And the platform that you have now, you have a podcast. Tell a little bit about your podcast and how they can get you on your website.
Yeah, sure. It's called Resilient Life Hacks. And every week I just have on a different guest who's been through something, some sort of trial, trauma, or tragedy, and come out the other side, and now they have a message. I believe we all have a story, kind of just like you were just sharing. And when we share our stories and we learn from each other, we don't feel alone. And we also learn new ways to cope with what life throws at us. I've interviewed so many different people, and no two people have the same story, but there's different parts of each interview I do where I resonate with it. It's like I don't exactly have that same thing, but I have this other thing where I felt a similar way. And we can just learn so much from each other. So that's called Resilient Life Hacks. You can find it at resilientlifehacks.com. My personal website is elizabethmeyers.me, M-E. And that's kind of the hub for everything. So you can link to my podcast there. I've got a bunch of downloadable files like this, how to hold on to your hopes that you mentioned earlier. It's kind of an acronym of things to remember to to overcome depression. I've also got one for peace, to overcome anxiety. There's a free prayer guide that you can download, a bunch of other stuff. So that's all at elizabethmeyers.me, and that's kind of where you can link to, find my book, find the podcast, whatever else you want to find.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much. And thanks for opening up about this topic. I know that it's, very personal to me, and I know if it's personal to two of us, then there's plenty of other women out there that need to hear the story. And I thank you for that. I thank you, you and your husband, for your service, your kids, for the next generation. It's just wonderful, and I wish you guys all the very best.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you and your family for your service as well.
Well, thanks. So stay on after the show's over. I know that there are some folks here that would like to talk to you. So thanks, everybody, for listening to Stand Up and Speak Up. We are dedicated to encouraging you to remove the mask of embarrassment and to being your best self. If you've been a victim of a cybersecurity crime or cybercrime, a scam, visit againstscams.org for assistance and guidance about options in recovery. We didn't talk much about SCARS today, the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, but we are an unincorporated nonprofit crime victim assistance organization based in Miami, and we support scam victims worldwide. If you can make a small donation, visit our website, and I'll have that up on the show slides. This episode has been sponsored by BenfoComplete.com, a vitamin supplement company that supports happy and healthy hands and feet for those with neuropathy. If you or anyone you know struggles with the pins and needles or numbness in their hands and feet, check out our benfotiamine products at BenfoComplete.com and use the special code STANDUP for 5% discount on your purchase. Again, thanks everybody for being here today. Go to my website, thewomanbehindthesmile.com, for additional information and resources. Visit our YouTube page. There'll be replays of this show there. Enjoy the replays and share them. This is an important topic today that I really hope that you can take to others and share, and realize that you're not alone, and it's time to stand up and speak up. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day. We appreciate you being here.